Speaking of safe, how safe is the thought process that Nebraska basketball cannot pull out of this with the pending schedule?
Well, they'll win a couple down the stretch. They'll probably win 2 or 3, maybe 4. They've got, an outside chance at whatever they're calling the NIT now or whatever it's called. They got a shot at that. That's probably the reasonable goal at this point. But they're going to have a hard time making the NCAA tournament. And that's, a byproduct. Honestly, it's a byproduct of the 2 home losses more than anything. If I told you, hey, they're going to lose at Wisconsin, at Maryland, and at Purdue, I think everybody's like, yeah, that sounds about right. Those are 3 NCAA tournament teams, and Maryland's playing pretty well. So that's not all that shocking. I think it was the 2 home losses, because if you win those 2, then you kind of go into the back half of the schedule and you kind of size it up and you say, okay, 14 wins, got to get to 20, 21. Maybe the sum will be greater than the parts, and you'll find a way to steal one on the road. For example, I think they could steal one at Oregon. I do.
Yeah.
I think Oregon is
it's a weird team.
Athletic. They're not great. I don't know how they're number 15 in the country, but their home court advantage is almost non-existent. They don't really get a lot of fans. They might get 4,000 or 5,000 to that game, and some of them will probably be Nebraska fans. So there's going to be some environments on the road where they can go steal one. They almost stole one at Maryland. You're not going into Wisconsin or Purdue on a Sunday and beating them. It's just very hard to do. They have great crowds. It's a tough environment. You got to find a way to win one on the road when the crowd isn't there. And the next one like that is Oregon and then Washington. If they can find a way to beat Illinois Thursday, and then they can go steal one at Oregon, maybe they're a little bit back on track. But yeah, it's disappointing. I know they're disappointed. You can tell they're pretty down. And he's probably trying to keep their heads up a little bit, but I think that's hard to do when you come out of the gate and you're down 19-2 4 minutes into the game.
Sam, what if you go into this season the way you did, coming off an NCAA tournament appearance last year, you start 12-2, and now all of a sudden the expectation is, let's hope we can make an NIT. Like, where does that leave the state of the program on a larger scale outside of just this season?
Well, from a micro perspective, it leaves it where it was, last year, which is you are building almost not even a program, but a team year after year. You're living year to year in the portal. And when you live that way, the level of consistency is hard to bank on, because you don't know from year to year what kind of players you're gonna get, and whether they're going to be the kinds of players who coalesce into a tournament bid. And if you mention, well, Nebraska should have more NIL money then, well, look at Indiana. Indiana has a ton of NIL money, and they're the same way. They're living portal to portal, and it's not working. And so you have to just expect that if you're going to do this, you're going to add 6 to 7 guys a year out of the portal. You don't know exactly what you're going to get until they start playing all the games. And I think one of the things that we've seen from this particular season or iteration of the portal is they probably didn't get exactly what they wanted in terms of rim protection. And I know there's no way they can be thrilled with the shooting of anybody but Connor Asik. Like, that's just not what when they went into the portal to get the guys that they got, I'm sure they hoped they'd get a little bit of rink mask shooting ability from Andrew Morgan. And he hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been rink masked. And I know that they were hoping that, Worcester would be at least a 30% three-point shooter, and Gavin Griffiths would be a 40% three-point shooter, and he doesn't even play.
I wonder if he should play. So, I shouldn't even – I assume that they're trying to win games, but Griffin's absence is a little puzzling when you need shooting, but they see him every day, and I don't.
Well, yeah, I think it is puzzling. They have chosen. Well, here's what I would say. Up until the USC game, I do think Fred is an optimist. I sense that about him, even though he has sort of a dry humor. That I don't think until that USC game there was a real oh boy, this is a real mess. I think there was we almost beat Maryland, probably should have beat Rutgers, but we lost because we weren't tough enough, and then they lost to USC, and again they didn't make any shots against USC, and then I thought on Sunday, they tried to tinker with the starting lineup, putting Hoiberg and Morgan in there, which is just frankly putting way more offense in there. And it didn't work. And maybe they need to put Connor Segan in the starting lineup because, they do. Maybe they need to be able to have a true three-point threat to start the game and maybe worry a little less about defense. They didn't really play much defense against Wisconsin early in that game. So I don't know exactly what they're going to do. It's a challenging situation because this is the team that they have. 2 years ago, they were in kind of the same situation, but then they had a couple guys get hurt, and everybody thought the season was going to be lost. And it was at that moment that Casey started playing because he wasn't playing that much. And then all of a sudden, he started playing a lot, and they got good. So I don't know exactly what the larger change here will be, but I think they're in a tough spot. I'm sure they thought they were headed toward the NCAA tournament with the formula they had, and now there's a 6-game losing streak. Now they have Illinois, and Illinois is a super athletic team that has been difficult for Fred Hoiberg to beat. I don't know that he's beaten Illinois since he arrived at Nebraska. I can't remember.
Sam, so I want to go back to something you said about the way these teams have been constructed kind of on a year-to-year basis. In your opinion, is that something Nebraska has to do based on the current landscape of college basketball, or is that something that this staff chooses to do because they think it gives them the best chance?
Well, you don't have to do it, but if you start with the young core and then you sprinkle in 1 or 2 transfers, you have to have some patience as those players get up to speed. I think what Nebraska has chosen to do, for example, is redshirt Braden Frager and Nick Janowski. And, they're redshirting them now and developing them as players. And I think the hope is next season, those 2 guys are able to play a lot and they'll contribute and I don't think be starters, but that they'll be major pieces to the team. And so I think they're trying to do a little bit of the young development, but probably need to get a post or 2 that you can do that with, and they haven't had a ton of luck there. In the current landscape of college basketball, I do think it's hard. Creighton's done a pretty good job of getting young guys and developing them and then bringing them along, and then they become the identity of the program while you add key pieces along the way. And, Creighton added Stephen Ashworth, and that was huge. They added Isaac Trout as a young guy. That was huge. Jackson McAndrews, a true freshman. And everybody can see, oh boy, when that guy's a junior, he's going to average about 17 a game, and he's going to be hard to stop. So I think Creighton's got a good template, but they had more historical success than Nebraska. And Greg McDermott, I'm sure, will say, hey, Doug McDermott helped us a lot, with getting things off the ground when Greg got there. So, you have to credit Greg McDermott, and you also have to credit Doug McDermott, who did a lot for that program in the 4 years he was there, and he set a standard that allowed Creighton to recruit more players like Doug McDermott to the hilltop.
Last basketball question for me, Sam, before I get to the DC carousel that I think is about to hit college football. If you're Nebraska and you said this is the roster they have, which it clearly is, and you've got to finish this out, is there a place or places where you could see Nebraska changing it up a little bit, where they simply maybe get fouled more, right? Or you play guys that maybe will put it on the deck where you could get to the foul line, or you could change it up a little bit since we're trying to force the shooting issue and making shots from 3. What if they change a little bit of a change in mindset where you try to get to the rim and maybe get to the foul line a little bit more.
They were doing that pretty well earlier in the year, and they certainly tried to do that against USC. Juwan Gary, made a lot of plays at the rim and probably had his best overall game as a scorer against USC. And so they were successful in creating some of those opportunities. I do think that once you get in the Big Ten, there's just not as many calls, and so it's harder to get to the free throw lines. And some of the teams just defend really well. Wisconsin's a little bit like Creighton. They just don't foul that much. And I think Purdue's kind of the same way. And so, I think Nebraska has tried to do that. And I think Fred has created some actions that get that going. I think what he would say is that aside from USC, which got beat a little bit on some of those plays, most of the defenses are like, we're just going to take this away from you. And we're not going to let Juwan Gary get a free run into the lane. And, Bryce can take it from the top of the key and dribble in, and that's successful at times, but you can only do that so many times. So I would say that defenses are taking some of that away from Nebraska. And so they're probably going to have to hit a few more shots, and this is what Fred talked about on Thursday. They have to play incredible defense and create offense off of it by getting turnovers and getting out in transition. And so, they haven't been able to do that very well either. Their defense just hasn't been very good. And when it's not very good, then you're not creating any offense there. And then you're also struggling in the half court. So it's a bad recipe right now, and they have to find a way to get out of it. I would not bet on them beating Illinois. I think there's a chance they can beat Oregon and Washington on the road. It might not be the worst thing to get out to the West Coast and around some very sparse crowds and play through some of your struggles.